In the words of the space program, Houston, we have a problem.
On the stroke of midnight, January 1st, 2000, millions across the globe held their breath. Would planes fall from the sky? Would the world's financial systems collapse? Would nuclear missiles accidentally launch? All because of a simple computer bug. This was the panic of Y2K, a global phenomenon that captured imaginations and instilled fear in the closing years of the 20th century. But what was the Y2K bug, and was the fear ever justified? Let's dive into the real story behind the Y2K crisis.
Y2K? Haven't you heard? At midnight, every computer in the world is gonna fail. Planes will fall out of the sky, and all the world's nuclear weapons will explode, annihilating the entire planet. No!
To understand Y2K, we need to go back several decades, specifically to the 1960s and 70s. Back then, computing power was extremely limited and storage space was even more precious. Programmers, always looking for ways to save space, adopted a seemingly harmless shortcut representing years with just 2 digits instead of 4. For example, instead of writing 1971, they would simply write 71. It seemed like an efficient solution at the time, but there was a ticking time bomb buried in that code. As the year 2000 approached, many computer systems, particularly older legacy systems, were not designed to process the transition from 99 for 1999 to 00 for 2000. Computers could interpret 00 as 1900, causing date miscalculations that could wreak havoc on everything from banking systems to the air traffic control. By the mid-1990s, the term Y2K bug or millennium bug had become common parlance in the media, and the fear began to spread like wildfire. Some experts warned of an apocalyptic scenario where computers across the world would crash, leading to power grid failures, hospital equipment malfunctioning, and even the accidental detonation of nuclear weapons. The global economy, heavily reliant on computer systems by the late 1990s, seemed particularly vulnerable. Financial institutions feared that the Y2K bug would cause errors in interest rates, balances, and transactions. Governments, too, were concerned. What would happen to everything from traffic lights to national defense systems? In response, governments, companies, and IT departments launched into action. Y2K fix teams were formed, tasked with auditing millions of lines of code, especially in older systems. Governments worldwide spent billions of dollars to avert the perceived catastrophe. It became a race against time. As the year 2000 approached, the media's coverage of Y2K grew more intense. News outlets ran constant stories on the looming digital Armageddon, while doomsday preppers stocked up on food, water, and other essentials. Fear was real, even if the actual threat wasn't entirely understood. Some major companies and institutions prepared for the worst. Air travel authorities considered grounding planes on New Year's Eve, concerned that aviation systems might malfunction. Banks braced for potential chaos in transaction systems. Even the U.S. Department of Defense admitted that some of its older missile systems might have been affected. One of the more bizarre aspects of the Y2K panic was the rise in survivalist culture. People began stockpiling generators, food, and other supplies, convinced that the modern conveniences of electricity, banking, communication would cease to function. At the same time, world governments and corporations funneled tens of billions of dollars into upgrading and debugging their computer systems. IT professionals worked around the clock, updating lines of code and replacing outdated software. In the United States alone, it's estimated that over $100 billion was spent on Y2K preparation. Finally, December 31st, 1999 arrived. Across the globe, there was a strange mix of excitement, anticipation, and fear. As the clock struck midnight in time zones around the world, all eyes were on the major infrastructure systems to see what, if anything, would go wrong. In New Zealand, one of the first countries to greet the new millennium, nothing catastrophic happened. As midnight rolled across Asia, Europe, Africa, and eventually the Americas, a collective sigh of relief spread. The power stayed on, planes remained in the air, and life continued as usual. The much feared Y2K disaster was a non-event. So why didn't the world come to a crashing halt? The answer isn't as simple as Y2K was a hoax. In truth, the reason there wasn't mass chaos was due to the sheer amount of work that went into fixing the bug in the years leading up to 2000. Governments and corporations spent billions of dollars and devoted massive resources to upgrading systems, fixing code, and ensuring that vital infrastructure would continue to run smoothly. In essence, the catastrophe was averted because people were prepared, but not everyone was convinced that the crisis had ever been real. In the years following Y2K, many began to view the whole thing as an overblown media panic. Critics argue that the Y2K bug had been hyped up to justify enormous spending by corporations and governments. Some saw it as a modern-day version of the boy who cried wolf. The legacy of Y2K remains controversial. On one hand, many believe that the billions of dollars spent were justified. After all, it was a potential threat, and the work that went into fixing systems likely prevented widespread chaos. On the other hand, some argue that the panic was exaggerated and that Y2K ended up being more of a hyped crisis than a real one. What's clear, however, is that Y2K served as a major wake-up call. It made the world realize just how dependent society had become on computers, and it highlighted the importance of maintaining and upgrading critical infrastructure. The bug also set the stage for future conversations about cybersecurity, data storage, and the global reliance on digital systems. The Y2K bug didn't end the world. Planes didn't fall from the sky, banks didn't lose trillions of dollars, and the power grid didn't collapse. But the Y2K panic remains a fascinating chapter in the story of modern technology, one that revealed our growing dependency on computers, the power of mass media, and the human tendency to fear the unknown. In the end, Y2K wasn't a disaster. It was a triumph of preparation and problem solving, but it also showed just how fragile our digital world can feel, and how a tiny coding oversight can become a global crisis. Anyway, I'm really not sure why I wanted to talk about Y2K, but here we are. Catch you guys next time.
Nice work, Lieutenant. Very festive.
Actually, sir, each of those lights represents a missile launching by itself. The pattern is just a coincidence.